Love the energy this morning. It's so great. It's so awesome. I was in Tiny Town with 4-year-olds a couple weeks ago, and I asked the favorite question. I think the most favorite question is, who wants to hear a story? And you know what 4-year-olds do. If you remember, if you have grandkids, your kids, 4-year-olds come up and get right next to you, right? And you have to figure out how to, crane your neck to see the words, but also, you have to be able to read the words and show the pictures at the same time. How many of you understand what I'm saying here? Read it again, mommy, daddy. Read it again. We have a hunger in our lives for story. Stories somehow connect us with something larger. Jesus was a storyteller. He shared stories about real folks like you and me, a business owner who went out and looked for day laborers, and he paid the same amount to everybody, even though they started late. That's a Jesus story. A woman was in her kitchen baking bread and realized she had lost a coin, and she went to find the coin. A father's heart is breaking for his estranged son. The widow down the street kept knocking on the judge's door. These stories that you know about, what Jesus would do is he would connect these stories with a larger story. How many of you have seen The Chosen, any series on The Chosen? It's a good series. How many of you saw The Woman at the Well, the one with the woman at the well? Wow, what a powerful. When I saw that, I watched it for the first time. I was like, that's very powerful. I watched it again yesterday. And I don't know if this is scriptural where Jesus interacts with this woman and starts naming her husbands. How many of you thought, my goodness, if that's really what it was like, that is powerful. That is amazing. Jesus is amazing. He went to where this woman was, and he built a rapport with her. And what is the most reasonable response of the woman? What's the most Jesus interacts with you. What's the most reasonable response to a changed life? Look what John says. Come see, this is what the woman said. If you remember, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him. Where was she going? She was going to a town called Sychar, which was the local village in Samaria. And she was going to the town. Now, she came out of the town at an interesting time. She didn't feel like she was accepted by the local community, so she was there alone because of some of the things in her past, and she didn't feel accepted by the community. But she left her water jar and went back into town, and she did some interesting things. She shared her story, and she shared God's story. Now, the entire town came out to see Jesus. And so I want you to get that in your mind. I want to ask you this question. Who would people say, and I want you to yell it out, in the last 100 years, the greatest evangelist on earth? Who would people say? Billy Graham, right? Billy Graham, right there. I knew you were going to say it. I'm a magician. So I put it on the screen even before. I'm glad you didn't say, like, Greg. He's so silly. It's terrible. Billy Graham, I want to compare Billy Graham with this woman. Because some of you are sitting out there saying, I'm not a good evangelist. In fact, dare I say, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. Dare I say, people say, well, I don't need to share good news, my story or the gospel, because I'm not an evangelist. I don't have to because I don't have the gift of evangelism. And you know what I tell those people? I say to them, shut up, you stupid idiot. And they're saying, why are you being so rude? Well, I say, I don't have to be nice. I don't have the gift of encouragement. So we tend to say, well, I'm not Billy Graham. Therefore, I don't have to do anything outside the walls of the church. I'll be a Christian here. Here this woman gives us an example that should encourage all of us. In terms of purity, Billy Graham would have people go into his hotel room and cover the TV up and check in all the closets, make sure there's no plants for people, to trip him up. He was a man of purity. This woman had a suspect past. She wasn't very pure. How about experience? Billy Graham preached in almost every country. This woman had not done any of that. She was jaded. Her life was not, her experience is a lot different than Billy Graham's. Her education, Billy Graham has honorary doctorates. This woman may have not ever been educated because she was a Samaritan woman in that culture. And yet God used her to bring a whole town to hear and talk to Jesus. So the question is, what makes someone a great evangelist? We're in this Preach Your Heart Out series, and so this is on my heart. If you've spent any time with me, you know this is a big part of my life. And so I wanted to give you a tool this morning. I want to talk through a tool. What makes someone a great evangelist? Here, this woman says, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" And that was her statement, and the response is, they went out of the town and were coming to him. What did she do to elicit this response? And I want you to know very simply, on the one hand, she shared her story. Come, see a guy who told me everything I ever did. On the other hand, she shared God's story. Can this be the Christ? Is this the one we're looking for? And she invited people to the feet of Jesus. On the one hand, she shared her story. On the other hand, she shared God's story, and then she invited people to the feet of Jesus. So maybe we have mystified the work of evangelism, and we've put it on a shelf that we cannot attain. This morning, I'm going to bring it down to the bottom shelf. So everybody, young boy or girl, grandma or granddad, moms and dads, friends, relatives, you guys are going to leave here with a tool to make you good evangelists. Just like this woman. Our stories are all unique. It's a picture into the inner working of our life. We are walking spiritual thumbprints. Despite your different paths, some of your choices and outcomes, you may approach life differently. You may be a messy house person or a clean house person. You may be come on over anytime, or someone knocks on your door, you hide. You may be extroverted, you may be introverted. You may be task, or you may be people. No matter where you come from, you have a spiritual story. If you've given your life to Jesus, you have a spiritual story. You were once lost, and now you're what? You're found. You were blind, but now you see. The old is gone, the new has come. So I want us to turn to Acts chapter 22. Acts chapter 22, we're going to see a master at play as it relates to how do we build our story and how do we connect our story with God's greater story. I want to connect my life with what God has done in me so that others can say, I want to come know more about Jesus. Acts chapter 22, Paul is in Jerusalem, and the news about him has spread. Jews are beginning to follow Jesus, and now the Gentiles are turning to Jesus. And the Gentiles, though, are not being forced to circumcise. And the Jews think that Paul is throwing away all the history of Judaism. He's throwing it out the window, and they charge at him, and they grab him, and they're ready to kill him when about 200 Roman soldiers step in, intervene, and protect Paul, rushing him to protection. He was bruised and beaten, and he still stops to address the crowd. So maybe he's emboldened by the fact that he has 200 centurion is at least 100. There's 2 centurions. So there's about 200 soldiers. So picture the scene here. And he stops to address the crowd. What would possess someone to do that? What did he share that he was so passionate about? What did he do that you and I can learn from? And is there something that we can duplicate in our lives today? Now, hopefully this week you're not going to be beaten by a mob. But if you were, how would you be able to proclaim a good story in the meantime, in the ruckus? Or you may be sitting having coffee with somebody. So I want you to do this right now, just real quick. I want you to think of 3 people in your life, a work associate, a neighbor, a friend, who you know may be far from God. You may have had conversations with them spiritually. I want you to think about their names, and I want you to put their initials or their names on your Connect card, on your worship bulletin here. I want you to put their names there. Okay? Take a moment and think about them. People who are close to you, but maybe far from God as you consider them. And let's figure out what Paul did. Watch what this woman did and see if there's something that we can put into practice, okay? Three names, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain that in a second, okay? Even as I'm talking, you can be thinking about, can you do 2 things? Can you think about those names and listen to me? I certainly can't. Maybe you guys can. But chapter 22, verse 1 through 5, the first thing he did was he built a bridge. Follow along with me. Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. This defense, this apologetic, this defense of the gospel. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet. And he said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God as all of you are this day. Verse 4, I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women. As the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear witness, from them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus to take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. What he does here is he builds a bridge. And he was in Jerusalem, and so he spoke their heart language. He spoke Hebrew. Paul, what he was wanting to do to calm the situation, this mob spirit of the crowd, he wanted to relate well to them. He shared clear and pertinent information about his life and experience. He says, I'm a Jew. I'm just like you. I studied under Gamaliel. So he name dropped someone that they would have. We know who Gamaliel is. He's a stud. He studied under Gamaliel. I can't, really? He studied under Gamaliel. And then he says, I persecuted these people. You can ask the elders. They gave me orders to do this, and I was carrying it out. This is who I was. I was the most serious and zealous Jew around. If I was to ask you how to build a bridge with someone at your work, a neighbor, maybe one of the 3 names that are on your sheet, how would you do that? How would you build a bridge like Paul? What did he do? Now I want you to understand something. Trying to demystify this idea of being an everyday follower of Jesus outside the walls of this church, of even being a walking billboard. And that is this. You think the greatest evangelistic tool that you have is the words that come out of your mouth. You think that the best tool that you have for evangelism is your words. And I'm telling you, that's not your greatest tool. The greatest tool, you actually have 2 of them, and that's your ears. The best tool that you have, that God has given you, is your ears. You're saying, how are my ears the greatest tool for evangelism? How is that possible? See, what I think you have to understand is, if you want to be a great communicator of your story and God's story, you have to figure out how to connect it to the lives of people where they're at. If you lack context, you may not be heard. And so why do I say that our ears are the most powerful tool? It's because of this. If you are hearing something from the mouth of a friend and it pricks your heart, like you hear pain, you have to be able to bring good news to that pain. The problem, the Philippian jailer says, "Sir, what must I do to be saved?" And I think that question is being asked all the time around us, and we're just not listening. They're not saying those words, "What must I do to be saved?" They're saying, "I'm just really stressed. I'm struggling at home. My son is just hard to deal with. I feel anxious. I'm lonely. I feel fearful that I'm going to get fired. I'm in a PIP relationship at work, and I don't know what to do. I'm scared." How would you respond to someone that delivers that kind of pain inside them? We don't want to just be like these robots to say, "Oh, I can tell you the gospel." We want to contextualize our story. We want to become all things to all people so that somehow we can win some of them. You see, for me, my story, when I was 15 years old, I was anxious. I was insecure. I was the kind of guy who was an athlete, but I could barely catch my breath. I was so insecure. I wanted to be accepted by everybody. And so I really performed. I did my best in sports. And I read the Bible in order to hopefully get accepted by God. And so I was very, very anxious and insecure. Chances are there are other people in this room that feel anxious and insecure. Chances are the things that you've experienced before you came to Christ, other people are experiencing them. Chances are the things that you've experienced this last month of your life that has been difficult, other people are experiencing that. The question is, are you connecting a bridge with your story with what you're hearing? That's one of the greatest things that we can do. We're going to build our stories here in a second. But who were you? What held sway over you? Think before you're a Christian. What was your life like? Were you lonely? Were you full of shame? Were you empty? Were you rejected? Were you rebellious? Were you striving? Were you living in chaos? Were you suicidal? What was it about your life that described you? I want you to think of word pictures. Number 2, how were your eyes opened? Look at verse 6. As I was on my way and I drew near to Damascus, about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And I answered, "Well, who are you, Lord?" "Who are you, Lord?" And he said to me, "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you're persecuting." Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, "What shall I do, Lord?" And the Lord said to me, "Rise and go into Damascus, and there you'll be told all that is appointed for you to do." And since I could not see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me, and I came into Damascus. God spoke to Paul. He shared about his life. He built a connection. What I want you to know is when we listen for pain, we're looking for connection points. We're seeking to be what Jesus says, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." I'm telling you, you become fishers of men with your ears and not just with your mouth. Okay? And then Paul shared with this crowd. Remember, he shared with this crowd, and now they're starting to calm down, and he says, "Look, I was on my way to carry out the orders of the elders, and I got knocked to the ground by this light. This light, this dramatic vision." He shared how God delivered him from a violent lifestyle of destruction by getting knocked down. He got Paul's attention. What happened in your life? How did you go from these negative aspects? Even today, how is Jesus working in your life? Your testimony is how you went from lost to being found. How did it happen for you? For me, as a 15-year-old guy, I was as an athlete. My Holy Spirit, sports athletics was my Holy Spirit. I played football, basketball, and baseball, and I loved it. And that was probably my God at the time. But a friend told me that there is this organization called FCA. You know what FCA stands for? Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I was intrigued. Really? FCA. And he said this. He literally said this to me. He said, you can have a personal relationship with God. That's what he said to me. As a 15-year-old kid, I said, really? I've never heard of such a thing. I would say prayers at night, Our Father, 5 of those, and then I would say 5 Hail Marys every night before I went to bed. I didn't know about a personal relationship with God, but he told me, this guy named Todd said, you can have a personal relationship with God. And at FCA, I started going to FCA. Guess what happened the first meeting? This is what happened. When I got there, I saw some athletes from my school. So Kevin Groom's there. He was like the star receiver. I was a sophomore, he was a senior. I looked up to Kevin. And the guys would hug the girls, but it wouldn't be this sensual thing. It would be like this side hug, and they knew the words on this. I was like so intrigued. And they got in a circle at the end, and the guys took their hats and threw them in the middle. And everyone was holding hands. And someone started talking. And I'm just sitting there like this right here. Everyone else had their head bowed. That person stopped talking. The person next to him started talking. And it went all the way around, and then someone squeezed my hand. Why did that person just squeeze my hand? So the only thing I could think of was to squeeze this person's hand. I squeezed this person's hand, and they started talking. First time I was ever in a prayer group. We ended the night with prayer. I didn't go back for 6 months. I was so terrified of these stinking Christians. Terrified. I couldn't control it. But something happened at FCA. I heard for the first time the gospel that I was far from God, that I could come close to a personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus, what he did on the cross. And so I always tell people, I turned from my man-made life, and I believe that Jesus, who's God sent. I turned and I believed. How would you share, if you had 15 seconds, how would you tell someone how God's changed your life? How would you communicate this? I like the idea of turning and believing. I don't know what you're going to say. And then look at verse 17. What is your life like now? Verse 17. When I had returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in one synagogue after another I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him. And he said to me, go, for I'll send you far away to the Gentiles. Hear what God has done. He's made a murderer into a missionary. What is your life like now? You were lonely. You were anxious. You were insecure. You came to Jesus, and now he's changed your life. What did Jesus do? So I want us to build our stories together. So I want you to take out your note sheets, the sheets, and I want you to get a pen. We're going to build our stories together, because I want you to be able to leave here with at least 15 to 30 seconds of a story that you can share with somebody, maybe one of the 3, maybe all 3 of the people that we put on our sheets, okay? Is that a deal? We're going to build it together. This is called the application of the message, all right? This is the application. Now, this is what it's going to look like. This is what you should look. This is how I want you, in that space at the bottom or somewhere, I want you to draw this outline. This is the outline to your 15 to 20 to 30-second story. We all love stories. I want you to write this. This is what I want you to put on your paper, okay? And we're going to build it together. All right? And I think you've heard some of these statements. How many of you have heard some of these statements before? Some of you. Students should be putting your hands way up. I think the students could share this message right now. All right? Does everyone have this? All right, let's build it together. What's the next slide there? Here's the trigger. Here's the trigger. There was a time in my life when, and this is the trigger that's being used by thousands and thousands of people all over the world. This one phrase is what triggers people to be, I'm going to share what God's done in my life. There was a time, and so if you're listening to somebody and they say something that you have connected, God has worked in your life, they talk about their anxiety, they talk about their struggles, and you struggled through that, but you've pursued Jesus and he's given you peace in this area, victory in this area, you can say, there was a time in my life when. So I want you to turn to your neighbor real quick and just say, there was a time in my life when. Do that really quick. Go, hurry up, do it. That's all I want you to say. There was a time in my life when. Now, next slide. Jesus is always the center of our testimonies. But these two blanks, I want you to write 2 picture words, word pictures, negative word pictures. For me, if mine were there, it would be like anxious and insecure. Who were you before you came to Christ? Is there something that you've been struggling with lately? And you're looking to Jesus to help you with. I want you to write those words in that blank. Take your time. Hurry up. So you got it? When you get those words together, I want you to say to your neighbor, there is a time in my life when, and I want you to share those 2 words, okay? Go. So for me, it would be, there was a time in my life when I was anxious and I was insecure. I could barely catch my breath. I always say that because I was a junior in high school, sophomore in high school, and you know how you can't ever get it? I was like constantly walking around with this insecurity. There was a time in my life when I was anxious and I was insecure. I could barely catch my breath. But then this next slide has the bottom line. This is what I want you to put. If you only had 15 seconds, if you only had 30 seconds to talk to somebody, at a grocery store, the waiter or waitress at the restaurant, maybe someone on the phone, you're talking to them. I want you to be able to share something about how God has worked in your life, the gospel of God, the good news. For me, I would say something like this. There was a time in my life when I was anxious, I was insecure, I could barely catch my breath. A friend told me I could have a personal relationship with Jesus. I turned from my man-made way, and I believed that Jesus is who God sent. I turned, and I believed. I turned, and I believed. All right? That's what you got to work on. So the application you can see on your note sheet here, practice writing out. My next step today is to practice writing out my testimony. And then sharing my testimony, probably sharing with a family member or one of the 3. There was a time in my life when I was anxious, was insecure, I could barely catch my breath. A friend told me I could have a personal relationship with Jesus. I turned from my man-made way, and I believe that Jesus is who God sent. And then the next slide are the kind of like, what is your life like now? What is your life like now? And I always today, I have confidence and joy. I have confidence and joy. Today, I have confidence and I have joy. I want you to turn to your friend, your neighbor, and just kind of say what you just wrote as best you can. I know we don't normally do this on a Sunday morning. I'll do push-ups later. But just fancy the old man up here. Fancy me, because repetition's good. So I want you to turn to your neighbor and share the beginning of your story. Go ahead and do that. Okay, it should only take you about 15 seconds. Let me just do a rep. Let me do a repetition. There was a time in my life when I was anxious and I was insecure. And by the way, if you're dealing with something today and you've gone to Jesus, my son told me, he said, Dad, I don't have a good testimony. My son Seth, he says, I don't have a good testimony. I said, what do you mean? Well, I don't have anything like negative in my past. And I said, that's exactly the testimony that you should have. That's a biblical, I mean, that's awesome. And then I said to him, son, have you dealt with anything lately that you're struggling with and you turned to Jesus? Well, yeah. I said, what is that? He said, maybe pride. I said, do you think other people experience pride in their life? I just want you to listen to the heart of people. And if you have experienced what people are experiencing, and they say something like, I was lonely, I was insecure, I was fearful, my kids are struggling, you should consider that as a, sir, what must I do to be saved moment. There was a time in my life when I experienced that. Just last week. I'm turning to Jesus. I'm trying to get my heart aligned with God. I don't know what you'd say. But the most important question in your testimony is this next slide here. Do you have a story like that? You want to always end. You see, Jesus says we should follow him and fish for people. How many of you love to fish? Raise your hand. Many of the men are like, me. It's me. So I'm not a very good fisherman because I don't have patience. So when you fish, I'm thinking that. No, you do this. But you put something on the hook, right? You want to make some lure, right? And you don't just let it sit there and rot at the bottom of the lake. You want to draw in the hook. You want to bring in the net. This question here, you must ask this question. Do you have a story like that? Is an incredibly important question. Why? Because if they say yes, you say, oh, I'd love to hear it. If they say no, you say, can I share with you how I had that story? That's another training. And by the way, in October, we're going to have 6 weeks of how to make disciples in your neighborhood training. 6 weeks following our neighborhoods weekend. In August, we have the beginning of Perspectives course. In October, on Sunday morning, hopefully we're going to have 6 weeks of how to make a disciple in your neighborhood training. And we're going to train you on this and how to share God's story. Very simple training. let me just touch your heart here. How do we deal with rejection and failure? I think the number one reason why people don't ever, like even if their heart's like, I should say something, you should say something, you should say something, you should say something. The reason why we don't say anything is number one, because we're afraid to. We fear failure. We fear rejection. That is the number one reason why we would not, like this week, I promise you, it's like you just painted your house, you start seeing how other houses are painted. You just bought this car, you're going to have opportunities. I promise you this week, you're going to have opportunities to share this story. You're going to have to overcome this fear of failure, this fear of rejection. Let me ask you a question. Does this fear come from pride, your own pride? Are you more self-centered, thinking, I don't want to go through this experience, so I'm not even going to try to have that. I'm not going to do it so I don't have to experience the fear. Do you remember that God called you first to faithfulness and not to, what is success? You think every time you share this, someone comes to, no, the success is just throwing it out there. That's what success is. But I don't want you to be boring. I don't want you to be churchy. I don't want you to monologue when you share God's story. When you share your story, it's 15 seconds. I don't know if you know who T.H. Huxley is. He was a well-known agnostic of the Huxley family. He was with a group of men at a weekend house party. On Sunday morning, while most of them were preparing to go to church, he approached a man known for his Christian character and said, "Suppose you stay at home and tell me why you're a Christian." The man, knowing that he couldn't match wits with Huxley, hesitated. But the agnostic said gently, "Hey, listen, I don't want to argue with you. I just want you to tell me simply what Christ means to you." The man did, and when he finished, there were tears in Huxley's eyes as he said, "I would give my right hand if I could only believe that." I have no idea what the condition of the soils are in people's lives. But I'm not going to prejudge who's going to listen, who's not going to listen. My job is to share my story and share God's story and invite people to Jesus. And all I've done this morning is equip you. And so I want you to really feel as we go into prayer. I want you to feel God's presence. I want you to feel, like if you feel like a toothpick, that you duct tape yourself to Jesus, who's the lead pipe. And I want you to sincerely ask God, of the three, who do I need to talk to this week? Which ones?